And then he has been very busy all week, and we're so glad to have him here tonight to tell his side of the story from the McIntosh view, literally. Okay. So welcome, Gary. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. It's good to be with you. My wife is here tonight. Carol, wave at everybody, Carol. Over there. We just celebrated our 55th wedding anniversary in June, so we're chasing my grandpa, Dode McIntosh, Chief Dode McIntosh. I talked a lot about him yesterday at the Sonoy Museum, but my grandma and grandpa were married 72 years. Wow. So we still got a few years to go. 72 years, that's longer than some people actually live. And, that's a long time to be married, but we're going to try and catch that record. We'll see. I want to also recommend to you, or introduce to you, Mark Pfeiffer, right over here. Mark, wave at him. Okay. So Mark was introduced a little bit earlier. Some of you may not have been here yet, but Mark has written what I think is the best book available on Chief McIntosh and what happened here. At last, the truth about Chief McIntosh just came out in 2021. Yeah. Around 2021. Yeah. We do have some copies here available for sale, but Mark has uncovered some new information that I had never read or never even heard about before, which sheds a completely different light on Chief McIntosh and what happened during that era. So I encourage you to get this. Another good book is the one by Billie Jane McIntosh, which is called Chief William McIntosh, Creek Warrior. And it's written more like a historical fiction book, but I believe she's got a lot of the facts in there correct. What I really like about her book is at the end of it, she talks about what happened to the women in Chief William McIntosh's life, because so much is told about Chief William and his sons and grandsons and all the way down the line, but not a lot is said about what happened to his wives. He had 3 wives. So what happened to them after he was killed here at this site? And Billie Jane has done quite a bit of research into that to talk about what happened to the women. So I think that part of the book is worth the book itself, and it's in an appendix at the end of the book. So if you're interested in that, you can get it, but definitely get Mark's book. Great book, and I think it'll shed some new light on what happened. Mark's here too, so you can talk to him when we're done here, and if you got any questions. We all know the basic story of Chief William McIntosh, the basic story that is told in lots of books and just gets repeated is that William McIntosh was a man who was greedy for money. He was a businessman. We know he was a businessman. He owned ferries on the Chattahoochee. He would put people up here at his house here, allow them to camp on the grounds. He also built the hotel over at Indian Springs with his cousin Joe Bailey in 1823. For the purposes of, making money as people were coming in on the federal roads that were being built, and the McIntosh Trail was one of those that people were traveling on. And he was an entrepreneur, and he saw business opportunities to make money. But the basic story, as you know, is one that paints him as a person who wasn't completely honest and was taking money that he shouldn't have, perhaps from the money the government were given to the Native Americans, and maybe distributing it to the other natives in a way that wasn't proper, so that he was making extra money himself. And that's been kind of the general story of Chief William. The lore that's been passed down through the McIntosh family that I picked up primarily from my grandfather, Chief Dode McIntosh, and his son, my uncle, Chinubby McIntosh. They were kind of the two historians in the family about the McIntoshes. Is that story about the common story of Chief McIntosh is not really true. That Chief McIntosh was a person who was trying to do his best to help his people and to make sure that they didn't move into extinction. Because essentially, the government wanted the Native Americans out of Georgia at any cost, and the government was willing to basically exterminate the Native Americans if they had to. They just wanted them out of here. They wanted the land. The white people who were coming in from Europe in particular wanted the property, and they wanted it for farming and other ventures. And so the Native Americans were going to get pushed out one way or another. And William was a person who was able to see that ahead of time. So in a simple way, I wrote down that, as you know, the Muskogee Creeks were divided basically into two factions. There were the upper creeks that were commonly referred to as the Red Sticks, and then there were the lower creeks that were commonly referred to as the White Sticks. The Red Sticks tended to be full-blood Native Americans. The White Sticks tended to be more of a mixed blood Native American. And many of them, of course, Scottish. The Scottish people had come here to the colony of Georgia basically around January 1736. Lord Oglethorpe had brought a contingency of Scottish men here to defend the Georgia colony from the Spanish who were down in Florida. And once their service to the British government was over, then many of them received land grants from the King of England, and many of them then moved into the interior of the colony of Georgia and set up farms. Many of them set up trading posts. And of course, many of those men were single, and they intermarried into the Native American tribes. And so until this day, many of the, when you read about the history of the Native Americans, there's a lot of last names that are Scottish. And it all happened back there in that early 1700s. So many of those that were intermarried were more of the lower creeks, more part of the White Sticks than the Red Sticks were the upper creeks. The upper creeks were more over in Alabama, what we would think of as Alabama today. Lower creeks were more around here, over to Indian Springs and over this way, through Coweta, Sonoya, and this area of the Georgia colony. Essentially, they had what we would think of today as two different worldviews. Two different worldviews. And in a simple way, the way I would put it is, from our perspectives today, kind of using some of our language today, the Red Sticks were what you might call traditionalists. They were the full-bloods, they were the traditionalists. They wanted to carry on their history as traditional Creek people. They wanted to stay with the land. They wanted to continue to practice their traditional Creek ways of life. The hunting, the fishing, the gathering, the way they made decisions, the way they elected their chiefs. They were the traditionalists. The White Sticks, on the other hand, were more what today we would say are the progressives. They saw the future. They saw that things were changing. They said, hey, folks, we need the change too. If we're going to survive, if we're going to be a people in the future, if we're going to thrive and have life for the future of our children and our grandchildren, we need to adjust. We need to adapt. And of course, we're still battling with some of those concepts today, aren't we, in many areas of life, the traditionalists against the progressives. And, you know, it's two different worldviews. Now, I believe that in the traditionalist view of the Red Sticks, essentially they cared more about the land than they cared about the people. Now, that might be a little harsh because I know they cared about the people. But I think the Red Sticks were willing to sacrifice the people to keep the land. And so they were willing to send their men into battle and lose hundreds of men who would die to try and keep the land. The land was what was important. I think on the other side, the White Sticks and William McIntosh cared more about the people than the land. They knew that they could not win this battle against the U.S. government and the people of Georgia taking the land. And so rather than sacrifice the people, the White Sticks were willing to sacrifice the land. And I think that's a very simplistic way to put it, but let me say it again. I think the Red Sticks were willing to sacrifice the people to try and keep the land, but the White Sticks would sacrifice the land to keep the people. Now, that may be too simplistic, but I think as I've looked back on it and read about it, and that's kind of the conclusion I've come to. So McIntosh wanted to do the best for the people. He was willing to give up the land in order to make sure that the people continued as a people called Muskogee. Now, why did he have this worldview? I've come down with 5 basic reasons that McIntosh had a different worldview. One of them was that he was a man of 2 different cultures. So sometimes it might be referred to by the Native Americans as a man of 2 fires or a man between 2 fires. One of the books that was written 30 years ago or so now on McIntosh is called Chief William McIntosh, subtitle A Man of 2 Worlds. And he literally was a man who had 1 foot planted in the white culture of that time and another foot planted in the Native American culture. As many of you know, his father was a full-blood Scotsman and his mother was a full-blood Creek. And so that made McIntosh 50-50. Now, in the Muskogee Creek tradition, you were raised by the mother till you were about 5 years old. And then around 5 years old or so, give or take, you know, a few years, the mother would hand you off to her brothers, and basically the child's uncles. And they then would raise the child till about age 11 or 12 or about that age. And it was the uncle's job to teach the child, particularly the boys, to teach them the ways of the Muskogee Creek. How to hunt, how to fish, how to speak to the tribe, how to dress, how, you know, the courtesies of the tribe. And, you know, it was their job to do that. So we assume that Chief William, as a child, once he reached about 4 or 5 years old, he probably was handed off to his mother's brothers. I know that we have the names of at least 2 brothers. We don't know anything about them, but we would make the assumption that the Chief William was raised by those 2 brothers because that was the Muskogee way. Now we know that Chief William's father abandoned Sonoya. Chief William's father actually had 2 Native American wives, and he abandoned them, and he moved back to Mallow Plantation, which is south of Savannah. I guess that way, is that Savannah? I'm from Colorado, and if there's not mountains, I can't tell you what the directions are. But he moved back to Savannah and married his first cousin and had another family back there. And we do have records that Chief William, when he was younger, did have contact with his father and did have contact with his half-brothers. So we would make the assumption that to some degree, William had some training from his father and probably other people who were Scotch, of Scotch heritage. And we do have records that William did, as a young man and an older man, go all the way back to the Mallow plantation to make visits. We don't know how much training he had, but we would make some assumption that he had enough training that he understood the Scot way of thinking, the European way of thinking, and all that. Again, we don't know to what degrees. But to some degree, he's this man of two worlds. He understands the Muskogee Creek culture. He understands the European white culture, in particular the Scottish perspective on that particular culture. We do know, a second thing that I think changed his worldview is that we do know he was able to speak both the Muskegon language and English at that time. And so this made him a valuable person. Just like today, if you are a person that's bilingual, sometimes that opens up job opportunities for you because, you know, if you're in California and you can speak Spanish, and 50% or more of LA is Hispanic people, they need people who can speak both English and Spanish. That opens up jobs. Well, that opened up jobs for Chief William too. May have led to him being elected chief. We know he was fairly tall, probably in the area of 6 foot to 6'2", something like that. Which in those days, when most people were shorter, you know, taller people tend to be seen as leaders, so it's very easy for Chief William to be perceived as a leader. But the fact that he could speak both languages, that's a valuable commodity for that day and age. He was chosen as the chief of Coweta Town, which was his town, very early in his years. Probably somewhere around 20 to maybe 25 years old. And we know that there was a delegation that was going to go back east to negotiate with President Thomas Jefferson. McIntosh was not in that contingency, but one of the chiefs got sick and couldn't go, and he was replaced with McIntosh. And then when they went back there, McIntosh ended up, as far as we understand, being the chief negotiator with Thomas Jefferson, which probably tells us that he knew English pretty well to be able to negotiate with the President of the United States. So I think that gave him a broader worldview too, being able to understand both languages. A third thing that shows up is that McIntosh knew the value of personal property. The Muskogee nations, they never held property personally. Property was held by the tribe at large. So the tribe owned the land, but tribal members were free to live on that land anywhere they wanted. Just take care of the land, you know, don't abuse the land. But the individual natives did not own personal property like we do today. You own your home, I own my home, we own our property. They had no concept of that. They had no concept of that in the early 1900s in Oklahoma, and that's why many of them were lost the property they had, because the white business people would come in there and make deals for their land, and would get them to sell their property for nothing, because the Native Americans didn't understand property. You know, why do I need 160 acres of land? What good is that to me? So you're going to give me a truck for 160 acres of land, I'll take the truck. And maybe the truck was worth $1,000. Well, what was 160 acres of land worth? Well, they had no concept, even in the early 1900s. McIntosh did. He understood the white people who were coming in, the Europeans, and taking the land, he understood, probably because of his relationship with his father and that more European side of his family, he understood this land is valuable, and we're giving this land away to the government much cheaper than we should. So in that day and age, the government was giving the natives maybe 1, 2, 3 cents an acre for land. And McIntosh was able to negotiate at least one treaty for about 10 cents an acre. Well, wow, that's 3, 4 times as much as what the government was normally giving. And so that tells us he knew something about the value of property, and he wasn't going to let his people, sell it for less money. Another thing that tells me he had a different worldview is just his business acumen. He was definitely an entrepreneur, owning ferries on the Chattahoochee, owning hotels. He had plans for more hotels on the McIntosh Trail between over in Indian Springs and here, all the way over to Horseshoe Bend, actually. He was thinking of building hotels. He thought that way. He thought about like a business person. Most of the Red Sticks and the Full-Bloods and the Muskogee Nation didn't think like businessmen. They just hunted, they gathered, they just lived day to day, week to week, year to year. They weren't thinking about the future. They weren't thinking about accumulating cash or property or anything that McIntosh did. Total different worldview. The last thing that I think really swayed him, though, was that William fought with the American military from 1812 to 1818. He fought with Andrew Jackson. And fighting with the American military, I believe he began to see there was no possibility of the Native Americans defeating the American government. The military had cannon. They had an unlimited supply of gunpowder. They had an unlimited supply of soldiers. The Native Americans were small tribes. The Muskogee Nation is not a whole unified nation. The Muskogee Nation was basically a confederacy of about 50, 51 or 2 small towns. So these small towns would have anywhere from maybe 150 people to maybe 1,000 at the most, probably, in their town. And they were all these small tribes. So there was the Cowetas, there were the Hittichis, there were the Uchis. There were all these little tribes. And somewhere in the past, probably going back to the 1400s or so, they had confederated together. They had come together because of common language. They came together and said, let's work together basically to protect ourselves. Because it's easy to knock off a town of 150, but if you got 50 of those towns, it becomes more difficult when they're working together. So the Muskogees were this confederacy of all these small towns that were there. But still, they had a limited supply of warriors. And like when they fought at Horseshoe Bend, the Red Sticks had 1,000 warriors at Horseshoe Bend. And approximately 900 of them were killed by Andrew Jackson's military. Now, where are you going to find another 900 men to take their place if you're the Muskogees? Hey, if the American military lost 900 men, they got more. They got more because they got colonies all the way up the coast. And they got this unlimited supply of soldiers. They can just bring in another regiment of 1,000 men. And I think when William fought with the American government, with the soldiers, and he saw the firepower they had, the gunpowder, the soldiers, he knew Andrew Jackson. He liked Andrew Jackson, but Andrew Jackson actually turned on him in 1814. And even though McIntosh had hoped that Andrew Jackson, after the Creek Wars were basically over, McIntosh hoped that Andrew Jackson would say, well, you good Creeks, the white sticks, it's okay, you can stay here, you can keep your land. But Andrew Jackson didn't do that. He treated all of the Muskogee Creeks the same, even if the friendly ones who had fought with him. And so McIntosh saw that. I mean, he's intimately there, watching this, seeing this, being, I'm sure, disappointed in what Andrew Jackson did. But he knows Andrew Jackson doesn't like Native Americans. And there's a long history of that. And Native Americans to this day don't like Andrew Jackson. And that's probably another reason why they didn't like William, because he fought with Andrew Jackson. And so I think William just knew from fighting with the American side that no matter how much the natives wanted to keep this land and fight, there was just no possibility of them really winning. And so I think basically he came to the conclusion, because of having this different worldview, that the Red Sticks didn't have this worldview. They didn't speak the language as well as him. They didn't know the white culture. They didn't understand the American military. They didn't understand all this. And so I think William tried to help them understand. This would be the family view. We believe he tried to help them say, look, look boys, look girls, we can't win. So let's get the best deal we can for our property, and let's move out the Indian Territory, and let's just start our lives all over. And of course that didn't happen. It didn't happen. There had been at least from the 1812 to 1818, 1825, about 12, 13 years of growing animosity of the Red Sticks against William. Then, as Mark has discovered, there was some Indian agents who were friendly to William and the Creeks, passed away, left office, and a new Indian agent came in who didn't like William and exacerbated the whole situation. So make sure you read Mark's book, okay? Get your copy before you leave.
Thank you.
Get your copy before you leave. But from the family view, you know, we feel like McIntosh has just been unfairly maligned. We feel like that he just had this different worldview. Ultimately, history has proved that McIntosh was right. Ultimately, history, even looking back from the day, proves that McIntosh was right. They couldn't win. And even the Red Sticks came to that conclusion about a year after he was killed. They came to the conclusion that, and signed essentially the same treaty that McIntosh signed and got him killed. There are some small differences in the treaty, but essentially it's the same treaty. A year later, the Red Stick chiefs are signing the same treaty, and eventually they all ended up going to Indian Territory anyway. Menawa, who was the main instigator of the tribal members who came down here and surrounded the house and led in the murder of McIntosh, and later on is recorded as saying, these are the hands that have McIntosh's blood on them, and McIntosh was right. You know.